What a knockout. Diego Lopes scores a second round stoppage over Gene Silva last night with a beautiful spinning elbow, followed up by some vicious ground and pound to get the stoppage. So in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at 5 things we learned from last night's UFC Noche main event between Diego Lopes and Gene Silva. There's some things that I spotted from both fighters that tell me a hell of a lot about where their ceilings are and where they go from here. Hello guys and welcome back to Alex on MMA. Well, that fight was an absolute banger for as long as it lasted. I think we all knew that it was going to be, and both fighters definitely showed spells in this fight. In the first round, Gene Silva seemed to open up really comfortably, getting his shots off. Diego Lopes consistently landing that calf kick. But then Gene Silva threw that spinning back kick, a real mistake. Diego Lopes taking him down and absolutely dominating for most of the rest of the round. Gene Silva had a couple of moments when he got back to his feet, but really that was a clear Diego Lopes round, arguably 10-8. And then the second round, Gene Silva really seemed to find his flow, putting his hands together really well. But Diego Lopes did what Diego Lopes does. He toughs it out. He keeps putting the pressure on. And then when you enter his void, he made Gene Silva pay the ultimate price. An unbelievable fight, absolutely action-packed. In a time where the UFC is being criticised for boring main events, this one delivered. So with that being said, let's get straight into the 5 things that we learned from this fight. And the first thing that we learned is the level of Diego Lopes grappling and his ground control. And we knew that Diego Lopes was an amazing jiu-jitsu player heading into this one, but really this fight showed us the levels, didn't it? So Gene Silva threw that spinning back kick. In hindsight, a really, really big mistake. But I think it just goes to show that this is the kind of shot that Gene Silva could get away with lower level operators. But when you're fighting at the very highest level against the true top contenders, it's so unforgiving. One mistake, like an ill-timed spinning back kick, can cost you big time. I remember Chris Weidman against Luke Rockhold. He threw a spinning wheel kick or a spinning back kick that resulted in some vicious ground and pound from Luke Rockhold. And this really took me back to that, because after that moment, when Diego Lopes was able to get the body lock on Gene Silva, take him down, the control was absolutely ridiculous. And Diego Lopes has given a blueprint to so many other fighters of what to do when you get in that mount position and the guy on the bottom tries to keep you held down with a body lock of his own. Those elbows from the top, the now legal 12-6 elbows were raining down. You could see a big cut on Gene Silva's head. And Diego Lopes just demonstrated his dominance on the ground. It was his control more than anything. His ability to both control his opponent, like Khamzat Chimaev was able to do, but on top of that, he was also then able to get his strikes off, something that Khamzat wasn't really able to do against DDP, because Diego Lopes was prepared to posture up, get some shots off, because he was so confident in his control and top position. And look, Gene Silva did a great job eventually of getting out of it, but the damage was already done. I saw one person tweet between the rounds that was a 10-8 round. And look, if you're not giving that round 10-8, it's pretty much as close as it gets. So the first thing that we learned in this fight is that Diego Lopes' top control and grappling is insane, but also there are levels to this game. If Gene Silva does make a mistake, Diego Lopes is able to get that position. At the very highest level, fighters are going to capitalize on every mistake you make. Moving on to the second thing that we learned, and this is the pressure and the chin of Diego Lopes, because Lopes ate some huge shots in this fight. We've seen Gene Silva on a streak of finishes at the moment, and so many of these punches would have put down most of the fighters in the featherweight division. However, Diego Lopes was able to eat these shots. Yes, he clearly felt the effect of a few of them in the second round, but he never looked really badly hurt. His legs never stiffened, he was never too wobbly, and he kept marching forward. This is an unbelievable trait to have against someone, particularly who's untested in these 5-round fights. Diego Lopes keeps marching forward, he doesn't move his head nearly enough, but his chin is just so good, eating so many of those bombs from Gene Silva. And the pressure is an absolute superpower. I think DC did actually mention this on commentary, that if you look up and down the list of champions in the UFC, one of their talents, one of their best assets is that they're able to put pressure onto their opponents, get them on their heels, get them tired, and then get off shots of their own. And this is exactly what Diego Lopes demonstrated in this fight. That whilst, yes, in that second round, Gene Silva was having success on the feet, the pressure is like chopping down a tree. It's eventually going to get to you. And fighters react different ways to pressure. In this instance, Gene Silva decides to fight pressure with pressure overcommitted himself, and he got caught by that spinning back elbow. And the ground and pound that followed up was just savage by Diego Lopes. Fantastic performance. And the second thing that we did learn from this fight, that let's face it, we did know this already, Diego Lopes' chin is absolutely incredible, and his ability to put pressure on an opponent is something that's going to keep him at the top of this division for a long time to come. Moving on to the third thing that we learned, and I want to speak about Gene Silva, because that second round, it was a really good performance by Gene Silva. He was absolutely dominating in terms of the significant strikes landed, and his variety of shot selection was really impressive as well. Not only ripping the hooks to the body, there were kicks to the body, there were downwards elbows like Jonathan Haggerty likes to throw. There was just such a beautiful variety of shots, but he just could not crack the chin of Diego Lopes. There wasn't much that he was doing wrong up until that point. One of the things that I did point out at the start of my preview video was that Gene Silva has a tendency to throw empty shots, leaving himself vulnerable. And I did get a bit hammered making that comment because people were saying that I just gave an example of his earlier fights, not his more recent ones. But ultimately, it's that throwing blindly, entering the void, as Demetrius Johnson likes to say, that got Gene Silva to become unstuck in this fight, that ultimately cost him. Because he went wading in against a fighter who is equally as skilled on the feet, maybe not quite as powerful, but equally as skilled, got really fast hands, and he paid the price for that. And Diego Lopes was able to catch Gene Silva a few times. The jab that Diego Lopes was able to land when Gene Silva would enter his space really seemed to rock his head back. Watch it back if you don't believe me, because there were a couple of jabs he landed there that really seemed to get Gene Silva shaking his head, shaking off the cobwebs, because they made an impact. But really, when we're looking at the positives for Gene Silva in this fight, the third thing that we learned is that Gene Silva's combinations, the strikes he puts together, are a thing of beauty. And let's face it, if he was to land those shots on most other fighters in the featherweight division, he probably would have got a finish himself in that second round. So there are still a lot of positives to take for Gene Silva in this fight. His hand combinations, his hand speed. I just like to see a bit more defensive responsibility when he's really going for it. Because I think when he decides it's time to up the gears, turn up the heat, he does leave himself vulnerable, clearly leaves himself vulnerable, as we saw at the end of that second round. But that's not to take anything away by his performance. I do think that he looked fairly good when he was on his feet. And with that being said, the fourth thing that we learned from this fight is that these are two extremely high-level fighters, but both clearly have vulnerabilities. Let's face it, that chin of Diego Lopes, it's not going to hold up forever. He holds his head very static, keeps marching forward. He's going to eat a lot of shots. I can imagine a fight against Ilia Topuria, although Ilia Topuria likes to be the one forcing the action on the front foot. If Diego Lopes was to eat one of his left hooks or right hands up through the middle, could you see him surviving that? Possibly not. And for Gene Silva, I think it's just a case that he does get a bit overzealous. You can tell that he's a very emotional fighter, the way that he acted in the build-up and in the octagon. He really likes to, he shows a smile on his face when he's landing his shots, and then his poker face wasn't great when Diego Lopes was landing some shots of his own. And then the body language when he was trapped on the bottom, when he was eating those elbows from the top, he looked as though he was really panicked, understandably really panicked, wanting a way to get out of there. But I think Gene Silva, that overzealous nature, will cost him a lot more further down the line. So I'm glad that hopefully he got it out of his system this time. So moving forward, he's got such great skills, such a great variety of strikes, as I mentioned before. But if he's able to be a little bit more disciplined in his approach, and it's really breaking my heart to say that because I don't want him to be in any less entertaining fights than this, but if he's able to be a bit more disciplined, disguise his shots a little bit more so that he doesn't walk onto something from his opponents, I think that will really add to his game. As for escaping bottom position and stuff like that from Gene Silva, look, are there enough years, is there enough time in the day for Gene Silva to become as good a grappler or escape from those positions against a high-level grappler like Diego Lopes? Probably not, but there's certainly certain things that he could do. I'm sure that he won't make the mistake of going for that body lock when he enters the mount. He'll probably work on getting his hips out, getting back to his feet much sooner, because when he did explode and really go for it, getting back to his feet, he was able to do so. And then in the second round, when Diego Lopes was able to take Gene Silva down again, Gene Silva wasted absolutely no time in getting back to his feet. He learned his lesson from the first round, which is a really good sign. But overall, I just think this was an unbelievable fight, an example of what mixed martial arts could be in its best form. There was grappling in that first round, some brutal ground and pound. Gene Silva showing amazing toughness and survivability to get through that first round and then start to put it on Diego Lopes in the second round. And then when it seems as though the momentum is really swinging back in Gene Silva's favor, he overcommits on a strike, gets caught by a beautiful spinning elbow, amazing technique by Diego Lopes, and that leads to the finish. Honestly, when you're looking at those two rounds, they're probably two of the best rounds you're going to see all year long. Unbelievable fighting. So if you're enjoying this video, before we get on to the fifth thing that we learned, please do subscribe to the channel for weekly MMA content. I always talk about breakdowns, previews for the UFC, and let me know what you made of these guys' performances. Were you impressed by Diego Lopes? Were you slightly let down by Gene Silva? Let me know in the comments below. Moving on to the fifth thing that we learned from this fight, and that's what's next for both fighters. One thing that really stood out to me was that Diego Lopes wasn't calling for a rematch with Alexander Volkanovski. This speaks volumes. He said that he was going to speak to his manager, speak to Hunter Campbell, and that tells me that he accepts that Lerone Murphy probably is next for that title shot. And there's one fight that I want to see next. I think that Diego Lopes has been brilliant during this build-up, and I really want to see him against Yair Rodriguez. I think that fight guarantees some crazy action. Just think about the kicks of Yair Rodriguez coming from every angle, the toughness and hand speed of Diego Lopes, and the personal beef and the grudge that's going to head into that one. I just think that's an absolute no-brainer. Get Diego Lopes against Yair Rodriguez next. I think it's number 2 against number 4 or 5 in the division. That fight makes complete sense to me. As for what's next for Gene Silva, look, I think the guy does need to take some time off. He took a hell of a lot of damage in that first round, and that finish was pretty brutal. I know that he wasn't happy with the manner in which the fight ended, but I think he needs to accept that he needs some time off, time to recover. And there's another featherweight that people just are not talking about at the moment, who's also injured, probably needs a bit of time to recover himself, and that's Arnold Allen. I think that this fight makes a hell of a lot of sense as well. Equally as entertaining, Arnold Allen is a crisp all-rounder, got good grappling, good striking, and Gene Silva brings it every fight. I'd love to see these two matchups next. Let me know what you think. Anyway, guys, that's it for the 5 things we learned from Diego Lopes against Gene Silva. I'm still, as you can probably tell, absolutely buzzing from this fight. Hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.